Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new White Suns record, Totem. These guys are a New York rock outfit, and this is their third full-length LP I dug on their sophomore album, Sinew, back in 2012. An album that was one of my favorites of that year, an LP that I thought was really refreshing in its chaotic approach. Chaotic approach to noise rock. Yes, noise rock. Bands from this genre that you may love or remember, like Sonic Youth, or Flipper, Boris, Big Black, or Jesus Lizard. All bands that have far more composure than White Suns. And while White Suns songs do have an element of composition to them, there's a lot of very visceral guitars and drums that seem pretty planned out and pre-written on this thing. Lyrics that go from really wild, twisted, dark poetry to unadulterated anger. And there are some pretty ambient interludes where the sounds, the noises that run throughout them seem so specific and so treated and so, I guess, fussed over that they couldn't possibly have just been made up right there in the moment as the band was just playing or performing this record. So there's really a mix of the sounds on this album being just so unpredictable and sporadic and very purposeful. There's a very structural element to this LP, and many of the songs on here have a variety of different parts. However, the tracks that White Suns pull together on this record are so psychotic and overwhelming that it makes it almost impossible sometimes to even concentrate or make note of these things. Or even think about things like technical ability or guitar tone. What I think has consistently been so impressive with White Suns is how they mix noise and rock music. Typically, a lot of the bands that I enjoy that sit in this genre just sound like rock music or punk rock music with a very strong noise element. White Suns blend these two genres together so well that it never really sounds like I'm listening to just one or just the other. I think they're also great at bringing about the emotions I typically expect from and feel with both the genres as well. I mean, this album to me it's visceral, it's exciting, it's aggressive like a great punk LP, and yet it's disorienting and grating like a very good noise album too. Totem to me is just a clash of raw adrenaline and the most bleak and tortured of human emotions. The band is constantly shifting back and forth between these overwhelming noise rock pieces and these very subtle, eerie, more ambient tracks on the album that really seem to segue these heavier, more hard-hitting spots. And these softer moments make for some really eerie interludes, and I sit there paranoid waiting for the band is going to come back at me swinging with a spike bat of So there definitely is an element of surprise to this record that was there when I was first listening to it. And this surprise element is something that I do find a lot of noise music records rely on, that wish to sporadically jar the listener by just introducing them to all these new and wild changes in pace and sounds over a very short period of time. However, I also felt that many of these songs were sticking with me. They had elements that were worth remembering or had kind of a spotlight on them or were presented in a way where the band really wanted to make an emotional impact on the listener with this part of the song. The listener has to really gravitate to this part. Meaning that while disorienting, yes, White Suns make sure to pack this album with highlights. Plus, on top of it, I think the band's done a really great job of building on the sound set that they had on their last record. I'm finding more layers on Totem. I'm finding more colors overall, some really dissonant, grating, just torturous electronics, intense feedback. This LP opens up with Priest in the Laboratory, killer opener for this thing. Later, another heavy track on here, Clairvoyant, which is one of the most pummeling spots on this entire LP, the intro of the song. Eventually, this heavy intro gives way to these noisy walls of sound that seem so huge and so monstrous that it's actually difficult to think of them being created by the human hand, much less regular rock instrumentation. It's so noisy, it's so layered, it's so impenetrable, and yet there's sort of an element of warmth to this as well that I feel slightly comforted by. Eventually, this wall of sound dies down. I love the overmodulated bass rumbles that are kind of coming in and the strung out guitars, and then the most amazing vocal on this entire LP pours through. My My God's face is made of mirrors. My God's face is like my father's. This song to me is easily one of the most twisted displays of human expression I've ever been an audience to, especially as the song just goes into this insane downward spiral of noisy guitars and drums and just repeated shouting of "Bleed it out! Bleed it out!" This album is no walk in the park. There's the song Cathesis, has a really spaced out rhythm, sort of primal, slow-moving groove. This beat is stacked with layers of dissonance that are kind of difficult to decipher the origin of. And the manic vocals all over this thing are just so passionate. To me, they just reach down in the most fed up of emotions and then amplify them 1,000 times. Typically that just raw, impossible to ignore emotion is what I like so much about the very shouty, generally screamy vocals on White Suns records, even though there are more toned down vocals on this LP, just very stone-faced, flat-lined spoken word. And even though if you take the vocals and just separate them out of what you're hearing musically on this record and just analyze them for themselves, they don't sound like much. I think the music does a great job of just setting the stage for what the vocals do and just complements them so well. I mean, the vocals sound like hell and the music sounds like hell, and it's just hell on hell on hell. Now, these heavier, noisier, more eventful tracks, like I said earlier, are segued with softer, quieter songs, which if you listen to them by themselves, they don't really sound like much, but they do provide some much needed breathing room between these very tracks. And that's not to say they should immediately go into the background in your mind as soon as they come on, because the sounds on a lot of them, it seems like White Suns really concentrated on creating some weird, strange, out there textures for these interludes. And then there's the World of Locke 2, which is a track that features an incredibly soft moment paired with a louder, more intense finish. It actually goes over really well. It makes me wish more tracks on here mixed these two worlds together, though I do think that, you know, it works really well in the context of sort of looking at the entire album as a whole. Overall, I gotta say, I think White Suns really did it again on this record. They came through with an even more impressive combination of noise and rock music, to the point where with their last album, yeah, there were moments that felt more noisy, there were moments that felt more rocky, but here it really feels like they've blurred those lines to the point where, I mean, it doesn't really sound like either. I think the production on this thing is better, there's more sounds, it's heavier. I think the lyrics, the poetry, the vocal delivery is a lot more stunning and emotionally impactful. They really fine-tune their ability to bring together eye-widening sonic weirdness with just explosive punk rock energy. I'm feeling a decent to strong 8 on this thing. Transition. If you've given this record a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, White Suns, forever.